Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we are going to be finishing our positional series for the 2024 fantasy football season with our tight end position preview. We are going to be going over our rankings and our tiers for the tight end position here on this episode. So pretty much we're going to talk about every single tight end that should be drafted in standard redraft fantasy leagues, which brings me to another point. Keep in mind, all of these tiers and rankings are for PPR scoring redraft fantasy leagues. If you are doing keepers or play dynasty or playing best ball, then a lot of the player takes and stats still apply, but just maybe not the exact rankings themselves. So that's important to know as we go through this. And since this is the last position that we've talked about, make sure you listen to our quarterback, running back, and wide receiver previews that are available on the YouTube channel or on the audio feed, however you may be viewing or listening to this right now. Now, I got to say, tight end is a position that I very much enjoy talking about. It's a position that I played when I was in high school. It's a position that I coached for a few years when I was coaching high school football. And so pretty much this is a position that I really know the ins and outs of. It's also a position where I think that there's a lot of math that goes on in fantasy football. I'm also a high school math teacher, so it's kind of right up my alley because I think that tight end is a position where if you can figure out how to win this position, you're giving yourself a leg up in fantasy football. So here on this episode, we're going to give you the guys and kind of the logic behind how and where to draft these guys in order to get a leg up at the tight end position here in the 2024 season. As always, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube so that we can be here with us for the rest of the season because we're going to be doing our weekly buy and sell lists, as well as all of our golf and college football content as well. And if this video helps you in any way, or if the rest of the 2024 fantasy football previews helped anyway, please hit the like button on YouTube, rate and review the audio. It helps me out a ton. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and start talking about some tight ends. All right, so tier one at the tight end position this year has expanded. Previously, tier one of the tight end position for the last 5 or so years has been a one-man gang. It's been Travis Kelce. Well, Travis Kelce has some company here in tier one this season. I am referring to this tier as the top dogs, and it's a two-man top dog crew. It's going to be Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs and Sam Laporta of the Detroit Lions. So it seemed last year to the naked eye that Travis Kelce was having a down season in fantasy. And the stats kind of back that up. He was a full 4 fantasy points per game behind his 2022 pace. He was just so good in 2022 that obviously he was going to regress a little bit, right? But he regressed a full 4 points per game behind his 2022 season. But yet he was still tight end 1 in fantasy points per game. And the volume was still there. He still ranked top 5 in targets, top 5 in target share, and top 5 in air yards among tight ends. All statistical measures support that Travis Kelce was still one of the best tight ends in fantasy in the 2022 season, but the perception around it in the 2023 season. But the perception around it was that he was a little bit of a disappointment because it wasn't what he had done in 2022 or 2021. And I mean, both of those things can be true, right? So that is why here this year, Travis Kelce is in a two-man tier one with Sam Laporta. That is why this year you are not seeing Travis Kelce be drafted in the first round like he was in last year or previously. To me, this year, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta, these are end of round 3 type guys if you're in a 10 or 12 man fantasy league. I think that you're not going to really see them drafted ahead of position probably 32. So maybe the start around 4 if you're in a 10-man fantasy league. But I just think that these two guys, they're great players. They're still head and shoulders above the rest of the position. But in terms of Travis Kelce himself, it used to be Travis Kelce was way up here in terms of production and the rest of the tight ends were here. And Travis Kelce kind of came back to the pack a little bit and the pack kind of rose up to him just a little bit as well. So that is why we have a two-man tier 1 here with Kelce and Laporta. So let's go ahead and talk about Laporta. So Sam Laporta was tight end 1 overall in 2023. He was tight end 3 in fantasy points per game, trailing Travis Kelce and another guy that we're going to talk about later. But much like Travis Kelce, all of the volume statistics supported Sam Laporta being a successful fantasy tight end. He ranked top 5 in targets, target share, and air yards. A big reason why he was number 1 overall is that he led all tight ends in touchdowns. And so really with Sam Laporta, we talked about on the wide receiver episode how we love chasing volume, right? Chasing guys who can earn targets, who have a high target share. And Sam Laporta does check off those 2 boxes. The only thing that is kind of the red flag with Sam Laporta is the fact that he did lead all tight ends in touchdowns last season. If he does have a little bit of touchdown regression, then that could cause him to slide down just a little bit. But like I said, I'm still comfortable drafting him as the second tight end off the board. And really, he plays in a good offense that is going to score a lot of points. So it's natural that he's going to lead the tight end position in touchdowns. Somebody's got to lead the tight end position in touchdowns. So why can't it be Sam Laporta again? So that is why I have Travis Kelce number 1 and Sam Laporta number 2. They are tight end tier 1, the top dogs at the tight end position for the 2024 season. And I would be comfortable taking them with a late round 3, early round 4 pick in standard fantasy leagues. All right, now tier 2 is going to be the 3 guys that I do believe have tight end 1 overall upside. Obviously, Kelce and Laporta do. They're in tier 1, right? The other 3 guys that I believe have tight end 1 upside are going to be sitting here in tier 2 as my tight end 3, 4, and 5. Now, before I disclose who those are, I do want to mention that there's kind of a cheat code for targeting tight ends in fantasy. When you look back historically at the tight end position, the guys who finish in the top 10 at the position annually are guys who are in the top 2 in their team in targets, right? The guys who annually finish 1 are guys who lead their team in targets. So if you're looking for a case to be made for somebody to finish as tight end 1 overall, then they're probably going to need to lead their team in targets. Now, if you don't think that this is backed up statistically, take a look at last year. Travis Kelce leads the Kansas City Chiefs in targets. He is the tight end number 1 in fantasy points per game. Sam Laporta got edged out by Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Detroit Lions in terms of his team's targets, but he was still second on the team, and he finished as tight end 1 overall thanks to large volume of touchdowns. Now, when you look at the top 10 lists, each of the last 2 years, 8 of the top 10 tight ends in fantasy were 1 or 2 on their teams in targets. The exceptions last year were George Kittle and Dalton Schultz. George Kittle and Dalton Schultz, both obviously a part of very high scoring, efficient offenses. The year before that, the only 2 tight ends that were not on the top 2 in their team in targets were George Kittle again and Taysom Hill. And Taysom Hill's just a special case. So really, if you want to be a top 10 fantasy tight end, you're going to want to be in the top 2 in your team in targets. That's something to keep in mind as we talk about the rest of this video. But if you want to be tight end 1 overall, you want to lead your team in targets. These 3 guys can lead their team in targets this year. They are tight end 3, Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens, tight end 4, Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals, and tight end 5, Dalton Kincaid of the Buffalo Bills. Mark Andrews is like pretty much second to only Travis Kelce in terms of his consistency in terms of domination of fantasy football. He has been a top 5 tight end in fantasy points per game in each of the last 5 seasons, including a tight end 1 overall finish in 2021. There's absolutely a case to be made that he could lead the Baltimore Ravens in targets. When they were on the field together last year, Mark Andrews and Zay Flowers had an even target share, both at 25%. So really, if you extrapolate that out to a full season, then Mark Andrews is going to be pretty close to leading the team in targets. He just has to stay healthy for that entire season because, obviously you kind of have to stay healthy if you want to finish as tight end 1 overall. Now, Trey McBride is such an interesting case. He's obviously coming into his 3rd year with the Arizona Cardinals. He was tight end 8 in fantasy points per game last season, but that does not tell the full story. The Arizona Cardinals started out with Zach Ertz at tight end last year as their starter through the first 5 weeks of the season. Trey McBride did not play much at all during that stretch. Starting in week 6, though, Trey McBride became a full-time player. And if you only include week 6 to the end of the season, Trey McBride was tight end 1 last year. Yeah, not something that you necessarily expected to hear, right? But if you think about it, the case makes sense. The Arizona Cardinals did not have like a dominant target earner at the wide receiver position last year. So Trey McBride was targeted early and often. He was targeted down the field. When you look at his college numbers at Colorado State, all the advanced numbers like yards per route run and yards per team pass attempt really jump off the page because he's a guy that at the tight end position can be targeted deep as well as intermediate and short routes. And so really Trey McBride, I think, just has an incredible ceiling. Obviously, there's more competition for targets this year with Marvin Harrison Jr. being an Arizona Cardinal, but Trey McBride really does have tight end 1 overall upside. That is why he is my tight end 4 overall, and he is in tier 2. Dalton Kincaid is the last tight end that's going to be in tier 2. He was okay last year. He was tight end 11 in fantasy points per game. Buffalo had some really weird splits in terms of who was in and out of the lineup. He was a lot better when Dawson Knox was out, but yet now this Buffalo offense is a lot different this year than it was last year. He could absolutely lead this team in targets. When he was in college at Utah, he led his team in targets. So he has the ability to be the go-to guy from the tight end position. Buffalo also lost over 200 total targets from last year's team in Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. So with this team having a lot of targets to replace, it's natural to expect some of them to go to Dalton Kincaid. So I think that Dalton Kincaid's sitting there at tight end 5 overall for me, but he does absolutely have that tight end 1 upside if he ends up leading the team in targets. All right, that's going to do it for the top 2 tiers. Let's take a quick breather, and then we're going to break down the rest of the tight ends. All right, so my tier 3 is going to be 2 guys that probably do not have a clear path to being, tight end 1 overall, or really a chance at leading their team in targets just because of the situation they find themselves in. But they absolutely have a clear path to finishing top 5 at the position when you look at what they have done in terms of production in their general profiles. And those 2 tight ends are my tight end 6 and tight end 7. George Kittle and Kyle Pitts. So let's talk about George Kittle first, because he's kind of a statistical outlier in terms of a lot of stuff that we look at. George Kittle was tight end 6 in fantasy points per game in 2023, which was actually his lowest finish since 2018. It's quite impressive. He's been a super consistent fantasy points per game finisher. The only thing that could go against him is he did miss some games a few of those seasons, so he didn't really finish as good overall in some of those years. But in the top 6 tight ends of fantasy points per game, that is a pretty good accomplishment for Kittle. Kittle actually led all tight ends last year in yards per route run, while being only 10th in total targets. So here's what that means about Kittle. George Kittle is like the best blocking tight end in all football. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. He is an aggressive blocker. He enjoys blocking. And unfortunately, it kind of plays against him just a little bit in fantasy because sometimes he gets used as a pass blocker, right? So there are times where he is actually not a part of the offense because he's being used as a pass blocker. And so it kind of decreases the amount of volume that he gets. But Kittle is such a dynamic player and really good after the catch for a tight end. He's really fast and really hard to bring down in the open field, that he's so efficient with his routes and with his targets. So that is how he is able to only be 10th in total targets, but still finish his tight end 6 in fantasy points per game. And oh, by the way, Kittle's splits are dramatic, that if Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel ever miss his time, George Kittle is like instantly a top 3 tight end. Consistently, year in and year out, you can look at his finishes when Ayuk or Deebo is out, and George Kittle is a top 2 or 3 tight end during those times. I don't have the full database to bring all the numbers for all the weeks and give you like an average or anything like that. But let me tell you, just go look at his good finishes, go look at whatever their stats were, and you can find that Kittle or Deebo and Ayuk were, one of them was not in the game at that time, mostly for Kittle's good finishes. So, if there is a Brandon Ayuk trade or if there's an injury to one of those 2, Kittle instantly jumps up in status. But right now, the efficiency of his offense is what carries George, and his dynamicism as a playmaker as well, are what carries George Kittle to being tight end 6 overall, even though he's not going to have as much volume as anybody that we've mentioned so far. Tight end 7 for me is going to be Kyle Pitts. So Kyle Pitts has been like a disaster each of the last 2 seasons, but I am so ready to be hurt again by drafting Kyle Pitts. I'm just talking myself into it year after year after year. After watching Kyle Pitts in college at Florida, I refuse to believe that one of the best tight end prospects I've ever seen is just a bad NFL player. I'm blaming Arthur Smith for Kyle Pitts' last 2 seasons. Like, I'm blaming him for Bijan Robinson's poor season last year. So Kyle Pitts was tight end 6 overall as a rookie in 2021, had 1,000 yards in that rookie season. That is quite an accomplishment. It's why everybody was all over him heading into 2022. And then Arthur Smith just totally did not know how to use him to make the best use of his skill set. Kyle Pitts is basically a really big, really fast wide receiver who can also play tight end. And he was not used in that way at all in the last 2 seasons in Atlanta. And oh, by the way, the quarterback play last year in Atlanta was utterly atrocious. They, as a team, had the fewest number of catchable targets in 2023 because of the low passing volume that they had in general, but also the poor quarterback play. There were just not a lot of positives from the passing game in Atlanta last year. So now Arthur Smith is out. Their new offensive coordinator is of the Sean McVay coaching tree, who is a heavy believer in 11 personnel, meaning that there is one tight end on the field almost at all times. They're going to use Kittle and move him around in the ways that he should be used. And I think he can return to the form that he had as a rookie, where he was tight end 6 overall back in 2021. Kyle Pitts is my tight end 7 overall. Now, tier 4 is going to be the rest of the set it and forget it starters. And here's what I mean by that. This is the last set of guys where you draft them and you can just start them every single week. until they have a bye week, obviously. But like, you don't need to try to play matchups. You don't need to try to, pick guys up off waivers and stream in that game. None of that. If you draft one of these guys, you can set them into your starting lineup and feel pretty comfortable about it week in and week out. And to me, there are more of those this year than ever. We're going to get all the way to my tight end 11 by the end of this tier. So really, I think this is a year more so than ever where the tight end position has a ton of depth. I think these 11 have certainly separated themselves from the rest of the tight ends, and I would certainly be trying to get one of these 11. Even if you want to go later on tight end in your draft, make sure you can get one of these 11, because I don't think you want to be sitting with any of the guys in the next tiers, even though I am going to try to make the case for them. So tier 4, the set it and forget it starters, are my tight end 8 overall, Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders, my tight end 9, Evan Ingram of the Jacksonville Jaguars, tight end 10, David Njoku of the Cleveland Browns, and tight end 11, Jake Ferguson of the Dallas Cowboys. So let's start off with Brock Bowers. So Brock Bowers might just be the greatest tight end prospect of all time to come through the draft. He's quite fast. At Georgia, they used him in all kinds of different ways, targeting him in all 3 areas of the field. They would even use him in screens and RPOs where they're just trying to get the ball in his hands and let him go after the catch, because he's quite fast. He is very elusive for a big guy in the open field, very powerful runner as well, very hard to bring down, great after the catch player. And he's a guy that you can just use in any kind of way. But the most impressive thing about Brock Bowers to me is that he led his team in targets in each of his first 3 collegiate seasons. Well, his only 3 collegiate seasons for that matter. I don't know why I said first. So basically, Georgia Bulldogs were the national champions in 2021 and 2022. Their best receiving option was true freshman Brock Bowers and then true sophomore Brock Bowers. Led the team in targets both of those years, national champions. That's not easy to do, y'all. As a tight end, as a true freshman, true sophomore. He's just that good. And he got drafted to the Las Vegas Raiders, where the passing game, we've talked about it on our receiver show with Devontae Adams, it's not the best, but Brock Bowers is on a path to see considerable volume. He can be used to get design touches in the screen game and in RPOs and plays like that. So I think it's really easy to get the ball in his hands. I think they are going to get the ball in his hands, and that is why he is my tight end 8. Now, keep in mind that before Sam Laporta last year, rookie tight ends hadn't exactly had a great track record. Kyle Pitts in 2021 was one of the best. And so I think that it's fair to be a little cautious on Brock Bowers, but also consider he is the greatest tight end prospect of all time, in my opinion. All right, now Evan Ingram is my tight end 9 overall, and I kind of felt bad ranking him down here, but he's really good. He's been tight end 7, tight end 4 in fantasy points per game in each of his last 2 seasons in Jacksonville. The reason why I have him down here at tight end 9 is because I do not think he possesses the same upside as all the other guys ranked ahead of him. He does have a considerable role in this Jacksonville passing game, but he is going to be battling for targets with the likes of Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, and Brian Thomas Jr. So, he's not going to be the type of guy that's going to lead his team in targets, but he's been really good in Jacksonville. I expect him to be good again. He's a very easy guy to draft and just put him in your starting lineup and feel pretty comfortable about it. And I think tight end 9 is about the right spot for him, because while I think he lacks the ceiling of the guys ahead of him, he certainly has a high floor. He is a weekly starter in fantasy football. David Njoku is my tight end 10. He's been a top 8 tight end in fantasy points per game in each of the last 2 seasons, set a career high in targets last year. And everybody wants to say, oh, go look at the splits when it's Flacco versus when it's Watson throwing him passes. Yeah, that's accurate, but is it possible that the guy just happened to have a breakout when Joe Flacco was a quarterback? He was also pretty good in 2022 as well. He was top 8 tight end that year also. So I think that I'm not really concerned about the splits between when it was Joe Flacco versus when it was Deshaun Watson. Obviously, this year it's going to be Deshaun Watson, which were the worst times for David Njoku. But I think that he just improved as a player. It took the next step, and I think he's going to continue to take that next step this year. David Njoku, my tight end 10 overall. Jake Ferguson, going to be my tight end 11. And look, he's a product of his environment, right? He plays a ton of snaps for a very high potent offense. He was tight end 10 in fantasy points per game last season and led all tight ends in red zone targets. That's the reason why we love Jake Ferguson. He might be described as a touchdown dependent player, but when you lead all tight ends in red zone targets, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to score touchdowns. And so that is why he comes in as my tight end 11. You can feel pretty comfortable drafting Jake Ferguson to be your starting tight end. Tier 5. These are guys that I think are really tough to kind of quantify. They're good players in good offenses, but they're going to lack total volume because of the amount of competition that they have to deal with. and that makes it really hard for them to have a legitimately high ceiling in fantasy football. But their talent as a player, the efficiency of the offense that they're in, makes it so that way they're in this range. And so the metaphor that I'm using is, in terms of their offense, they're going to get a small slice of the pie, but it's a really good pie. So tight end 12 and tight end 13 are going to be Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles and Dalton Schultz of the Houston Texans. Since 2019, Dallas Goedert has never finished higher than tight end 8 or lower than tight end 12 in fantasy points per game. That is because this Eagles offense has routinely had other competition for targets, whether it be Alshon Jeffrey to then A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. And, now when they get in the red zone, you have to deal with the tush push, vulturing some touchdowns that could go to tight ends. So Dallas Goedert, he's a good player in a good offense. With just the problem is there's just too much competition for targets for me to rank him any higher. Like we talked about earlier, most top 10 fantasy tight ends are on the top 2 in their team in targets, and Dallas Goedert is not going to be that. He's going to be behind A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So that would require, like George Kittle does, a ton of efficiency from him or a ton of touchdowns from him. And I just can't rank him higher than where he's at right now, if I'm being honest. Dalton Schultz last year was pretty good also. He was tight end 11 in fantasy points per game, but much like Goddard, he doesn't have a big slice of the pie of his offense. He ended in 12th in total targets, 15th in target share, and this Houston Texans offense just brought in more competition for targets with Stephon Diggs in the offseason. So Dalton Schultz, he's a good player in a good offense, a very good passing offense in Houston, but just he doesn't get enough total volume to support me moving him up any higher than tight end 13. Tier 6 is going to be the fantasy backups with upside. This is Pat Freiermuth, Cole Kmet, TJ Hawkinson, Hunter Henry, and Taysom Hill. These are guys that I would not want to draft to be my starting tight end in fantasy football, but they should be drafted, and they do have upside to finish higher. I did put an asterisk next to Taysom Hill, by the way, because some sites do not have him as a tight end. If he is a tight end, he's in this tier somewhere. He's just a certain super unique player, and he's gonna score touchdowns just randomly. And if you need to stream a tight end, you need to pick a guy up off the waiver wire, whatever. You need to fill in for a guy that's injured. He's a great option for that because you never know when they're just going to play Taysom Hill and he's going to score 2 random touchdowns. Now, let's start with my tight end 13, Pat Freiermuth. So he has very minimal competition for targets in Pittsburgh. Nobody other than George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth has had a 50-catch NFL season in this Pittsburgh offense, and he should be utilized heavily. This is going to be an Arthur Smith offense. As much as I hate him for the Atlanta guys, I think he could be pretty good for Pat Freiermuth. He's going to play him all the time. So I think this is a pretty good spot for Freiermuth, tight end 13 overall. Cole Kmet is my tight end 14. He was tight end 9 in fantasy points per game last season. The one concern is that Gerald Everett is coming into Chicago, and Gerald Everett has been playing quite a lot with the starters in the preseason. It is unknown if Kmet or Everett is going to be the week 1 starter at tight end, but Kmet has been the better pro player throughout his time in Chicago. He's been a top 10 fantasy tight end. So I think there's a lot to like with Kmet, but there is definitely some concern about Gerald Everett eating into his total snaps play. TJ Hawkinson's an interesting one. He's a guy that I like drafting a lot in ReDraft Fantasy Football as opposed to Best Ball, because in ReDraft, you can draft TJ Hawkinson. He's hurt right now. You can put him on IR. You can add somebody else from the waiver wire. And, he can sit in that IR spot until he's ready to go. And when he's ready to go, he's going to be pretty good. Last season, he was tight end 2 in fantasy points per game before he got injured, trailing only Travis Kelce ahead of Sam Laporta. So if he's able to make a full recovery this season, when he comes back, he's going to be a starting option tight end. You just have to have, you have to be comfortable with filling a roster spot with somebody else for, probably 6 to 8 weeks. I don't know the timetable on when he's going to come back, but when he does, he's going to be great. Hunter Henry has been a top 15 tight end in fantasy points per game in 2 of his 3 seasons in New England. There's now less competition than ever for targets in New England. And the new quarterback coming in, Drake May, loved to target his tight ends in college. So I think this is not a bad spot for Hunter Henry. Tight end 16 overall feels about right for him in my book. All right, tight end 7. These are going to be some late round dart throws. These are the guys that I'm comfortable with drafting as my backup very late in fantasy drafts. I would not want to be leaving a draft with one of these guys as my starter, though. They are Tyler Conklin, Luke Musgrave, Noah Fant, and Jonnu Smith. Tyler Conklin, much has been made of this Jets offense and, the passing game and how bad it was last year, and now they're getting Aaron Rodgers. He was tight end 16 in expected fantasy points per game last season, which, we use that expected fantasy points per game. We generally use it when a guy was a part of a bad offense, and Conklin was. So, if he just gets adequate quarterback play from Aaron Rodgers, there's minimal competition for targets outside of Garrett Wilson. So Conklin could absolutely be second or third on his team in targets and could be a pretty sustainable fantasy tight end. Luke Musgrave of the Packers is entering his second year. He was their starting tight end at the start of the year last year. He's looked to be the starting tight end in the preseason. The only concern is that he did get hurt last year. And after he returned from injury, Tucker Kraft kind of usurped his role a little bit, but Luke Musgrave was the starter before then. This Packers offense is ascending with young quarterback Jordan Love and a lot of young receiving options, and Musgrave could very easily take the next step with his quarterback. Noah Fant's a guy I like a lot in Seattle. He only played a 54% snap share last season because that team had 3 competent tight ends. Well, guess what? The other 2 are gone, and Noah Fant now should be the only tight end used in Seattle. And we have, coming over to Seattle, Ryan Grubb, the former offensive coordinator at Washington. They use tight ends quite a bit at Washington, and they will look to use Fant as the only one. So if Fant plays a full snap share, then he's going to have a chance to have a successful fantasy season. When he was in Denver, he did have 2 top 12 fantasy tight end seasons in his career. Jonnu Smith is an interesting one. So Jonnu Smith was a guy that was in Atlanta that kind of overshadowed Kyle Pitts at times. He was tight end 20 last season with the Falcons, and he was not a full-time player, did not play a full allotment of snaps. And now he's in Miami in one of the best offenses in the league, looking to play a full allotment of snaps. So I think Jonnu Smith has a particularly high ceiling. I do not mind waiting to the very end of drafts to get Jonnu Smith on my roster. Now, tier 8 for me is going to be the last one. They're the others receiving votes. So look, the tight end position is like, I don't know. I'm trying to think the best way to, like, a good metaphor to describe it. And I can't come up with one off the top of my head, but you don't need to draft a second one if you have a good first one. And it's definitely a position where if you're looking for a backup, if there's a guy that you have irrational hope for, you can keep him on the end of your bench and wait for him to break out for a few weeks. And if it doesn't work out, you can drop him and move on to somebody else. It's the bottom of the tight end position rotates quite a bit, right? So these guys are all guys that I'd be comfortable with drafting in the last round of a draft, or, picking up on the waiver wire, or just guys to look out for. And maybe they have a breakout this season. So first is Chig Okonkwo of the Tennessee Titans. The Titans, very run heavy offense under Mike Vrabel. They now have Bill Callahan or Brian Callahan. Is he a Bill or Brian? Anyway, they have a Callahan as the head coach, and he is of the Sean McVay coaching tree. This is going to be a much better passing offense than it has been in years past, and with that should upgrade the status of Chig Okonkwo. Ben Sinnott is a rookie in Washington, and again, we've talked about a theme for this episode. Can these guys be second on their team in targets? Well, they just traded Jahan Dotson, and so somebody's got to step up and get targets in this Washington passing game other than Terry McLaurin. Ben Sinnott could be the guy. He was a very good player last year at Kansas State, was used in a lot of ways kind of as an H-back role where he was, lining up at fullback sometimes. They got him the ball a lot in the red zone. Very versatile player, very athletic player. Absolutely could have a good fantasy season this year. Ja'Tavion Sanders of the Carolina Panthers is another guy that's a rookie. He was a great prospect coming out of Texas. Just really solid player, can be used in a lot of ways. And Dave Canales, the new head coach there, obviously he drafted him for a reason, and there's very little competition at the tight end position. He just step in and be a day one starter for the Panthers. Theo Johnson of the Giants is kind of the same exact way, right? He was a good prospect coming out of Penn State. Darren Waller retires. He's kind of the de facto starter by default. And if you're looking for a breakout rookie tight end, we just talked about 3 of them right there. Isaiah Likely is another one that I would target. He's like a tight end handcuff where if you draft Mark Andrews and Mark Andrews gets hurt, Isaiah Likely would be like 90% of Mark Andrews once Mark Andrews is out, because Lamar Jackson loves targeting his tight ends. Colby Parkinson has moved to the Los Angeles Rams. We've talked about the Sean McVay coaching tree, loving to play 11 personnel and loving to play a lot of snaps tight end. Well, now he obviously plays for the actual Sean McVay. And so he's going to be the starter there in Los Angeles. He, as long as Tyler Higbee is hurt, which should last for most of the season. And so Parkinson's going to have a good chance to, kind of carve out a sizable role, could be pretty productive there with the Los Angeles Rams. And then lastly, we mentioned him, kind of alluded to him earlier, Tucker Kraft in Green Bay. What if he does end up being the starter over Luke Musgrave? Then, everything I said about Luke Musgrave could probably go for Tucker Kraft as well. All right, that's going to do it here for this episode, guys. Hopefully, we were able to help give you guys some good information and help you guys pick the right tight ends in your fantasy drafts this season. If this video gave you any kind of helped you in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube, rate and review if you're listening on audio. Those help me out a ton. I cannot express enough how much those help me out. So just very much thank you if you have done so, and I appreciate when you guys do that. Also, make sure you subscribe. That we can be here with us for the rest of NFL season as well as college football and golf season. We're going to have weekly content for all three of those sports. And go check out the rest of the position previews if you have not already. Quarterback, both the running back episodes, both the wide receiver episodes. That's 5 episodes other than this one. We did 6 total. So make sure you go check those out so you can be super prepared for your fantasy drafts this year. Also, if you're looking to try something new, we kind of alluded to best ball a little bit earlier. Maybe you're looking to try best ball, you're looking to try a new player prop site or something like that. Head on over to signupexpert.com/MikesPicks. You'll get the best promo codes for all those sites, and it'll even sync to your location to only show you what is legal in your area. And then if you want to know my full exact rankings for not only the tight end position, but every other position, as well as get some tools to help you out in best ball drafts this season, head on over to my Patreon, patreon.com/MikesMoneyPicks. All right, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Like I said, hopefully I was able to help you guys out, give you guys some good information to know who to draft at the tight end position. But thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.